The day Brenda Carlson slapped a $50 fine on my door for having a non-regulation mailbox was the day I discovered something very interesting about property lines and postal infrastructure in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. I had just gotten home from work, loosening my tie as I walked up the driveway of my modest ranch house in Saguaro Heights, when I saw the neon orange notice flapping in the evening breeze. My name, Derek York, was printed at the top in bold letters, followed by a laundry list of supposed violations. The mailbox, apparently, was painted the wrong shade of black. It was supposed to be midnight onyx, according to the HOA guidelines, but mine was clearly standard black, which was a completely different thing in Brenda's world. I ripped the notice off my door and read through it twice, feeling my blood pressure rise with each word. The fine was dated for that afternoon, giving me exactly 72 hours to either repaint my mailbox or replace it entirely with an approved model. At the bottom, in Brenda's distinctive loopy handwriting, was a note. Third violation results in a lien on your property. This is your second. Respectfully, Brenda Carlson, HOA President. The mailbox had been there when I bought the house 3 years ago. I had never touched it, never repainted it, never even thought about it beyond shoving bills and junk mail into it every day. But now, suddenly, it was a crisis that threatened my home ownership. I walked back down my driveway and stared at the offending mailbox. It looked like every other mailbox on my street. Black post, black box, silver numbers indicating my address. Nothing fancy, nothing offensive, just a regular mailbox doing its job of receiving mail. My neighbor, Tom, was out watering his lawn and saw me examining the mailbox like it held the secrets of the universe. He walked over, hose still in hand. "Let me guess," Tom said. "Brenda got you too." "What do you mean, too?" "She's been on a tear this month. Fined the Johnsons for having their trash cans visible from the street, even though it was trash day. Hit up the Morales family because their grass was 3¼ inches instead of 3 inches. I got dinged last week because my house numbers weren't centered properly on my door frame. They were off by ½ an inch. I showed him the notice. Tom read it and shook his head. The mailbox thing is new. She must be running out of things to complain about. Can she actually do this? Put a lien on my house. Technically, yeah. The HOA agreement we all signed gives them that power, but you'd have to ignore multiple fines first. Still, I take it seriously. Brenda's gotten more aggressive lately. I think she's bored since she retired from her job at the DMV. Of course she worked at the DMV. That explained so much. I went inside and dug out my HOA documents from the filing cabinet. It took me an hour to find the section on mailboxes, and when I did, I nearly threw the binder across the room. There were 6 pages dedicated to mailbox specifications. 6 pages. The paint color, the dimensions, the acceptable materials, the required height from ground to bottom of post, the angle at which the door should close, even the specific type of screws that should be visible. But here was the thing. My mailbox wasn't actually in violation. According to the guidelines, mailboxes installed before 2019 were grandfathered in under the old rules, which were much more lenient. My mailbox had been installed in 2015, according to the home inspection report from when I purchased the property. I had Brenda dead to rights. This fine was completely invalid. The next morning, I took a personal day from my job at the software company downtown and drove to Brenda's house at 8 in the morning. She lived on Ocotillo Drive, 3 streets over from mine on Palo Verde Lane, in a house that looked like it had been decorated by someone who thought more was always better. Fake flower arrangements flanked her doorway. A wooden sign proclaimed "Live, Laugh, Love" near her doorbell, and garden gnomes clustered around a fountain in her front yard. I rang the doorbell and heard the Westminster chimes echo inside. Brenda opened the door wearing a velour tracksuit and holding a coffee mug that said "World's Best HOA President." I had to fight to keep my expression neutral. "Derek," she said, her voice sugary sweet but her eyes cold. "What brings you by so early?" "This fine," I said, holding up the orange notice. "It's invalid. My mailbox is grandfathered under the 2015 regulations." Her smile didn't waver. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. The board voted last month to eliminate the grandfather clause. All mailboxes must now comply with current standards. You can't retroactively apply new rules without proper notice to homeowners. We sent an email blast. I never got an email." "That sounds like a personal problem. The fine stands. You have 71 hours remaining to comply." She started to close the door, but I put my hand against it. "I'm not paying this fine, Brenda. It's unreasonable and likely not enforceable." Her expression finally shifted, the fake sweetness evaporating. "Then you'll receive a third violation and we'll begin lien proceedings. I don't make the rules, Derek. I just enforce them. Maybe if you attended HOA meetings, you'd be more informed. The meetings are scheduled at 2 in the afternoon on Tuesdays. Most people work. The board voted on that time. Majority rules. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other violations to document." She shut the door in my face. I stood on her porch for a moment, breathing deeply, reminding myself that getting arrested for disturbing the peace wouldn't help my situation. Then I walked back to my truck and sat in it, trying to figure out my next move. That's when I noticed something interesting. I had parked across the street from Brenda's house, and from this angle, I could see the cluster mailbox that served Ocotillo Drive and 2 other streets in that section of the neighborhood. It was one of those large USPs installed units with individual locked boxes for each house, meant to make mail delivery more efficient. The cluster box sat on a small concrete pad, surrounded by desert landscaping. And as I looked at it, really looked at it, something clicked in my memory. When I had bought my house, the title company had given me a thick folder of property documents. Most of it was standard stuff, but there had been one unusual item, an easement agreement. The developer who built Saguaro Heights in the early 2000s had donated several small parcels of land throughout the neighborhood for community use. These parcels were meant for things like retention ponds, walking paths, and utility infrastructure. One of those donated parcels belonged to me. I drove home and tore through my files until I found the property survey. There it was, clear as day. Parcel 847B, approximately 200 square feet, designated for postal infrastructure. And according to the map, that parcel was exactly where the cluster mailbox for Ocotillo Drive was located. The developer had put the easement on my property, but maintained that when the land was sold, the new owner would inherit certain rights. I read through the legal language 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. The easement allowed USPs to maintain a cluster box on the parcel, but the landowner, me, had the right to terminate the easement with 90 days' notice to all affected parties. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation was too perfect. Brenda wanted to fine me for my mailbox. I could remove hers entirely, but I wasn't going to be impulsive about this. I needed to make sure I was on solid legal ground. I called up an attorney friend, Marcus, who specialized in property law. "Derek, my man, what's going on?" Marcus answered on the second ring. "I need you to look at some property documents for me. HOA situation." "Say no more. I hate HOAs. Email me everything." I scanned and sent all the relevant documents. The easement agreement, the property survey, the title documents, and for good measure, the ridiculous HOA fine. 30 minutes later, Marcus called me back. "This is wild," he said. "Yeah, you absolutely have the right to terminate this easement. The language is crystal clear. The developer set it up so that the property owner has ultimate control, probably as a negotiating point to make the lots more attractive. You give 90 days notice to USPs, the HOA, and all affected residents, and after that 90 days, you can legally require the removal of the cluster box. And there's no way they can fight it. They could try, but they'd lose. Property rights are property rights." The easement was granted voluntarily and can be terminated the same way. Now, would you actually do this? Because it's going to make you real popular with your neighbors. The HOA president is threatening to put a lien on my house over mailbox paint color. Ah, yeah, okay, I get it. Want me to draft the notice, please? Give me until end of day. I'll make it ironclad. I spent the rest of the day researching HOA law in Arizona. It turned out that while HOAs had broad powers, they also had significant limitations. The bylaws required notice of at least 30 days for any changes to regulations, and those changes had to be voted on at a properly noticed meeting. If Brenda had eliminated the grandfather clause via email without a proper vote, that was a violation of the HOA's own rules. I drafted a formal appeal of my fine, citing the specific sections of the HOA bylaws that Brenda had violated. I also requested copies of the meeting minutes where the mailbox rule change had been voted on. I knew those minutes didn't exist because the meeting had never happened. Marcus emailed me the termination of easement notice at 5 that evening. It was beautifully written, formally citing all relevant property codes and easement law. It included a detailed explanation of the 90-day timeline and the requirements for the USPs to remove their equipment and restore the land. I printed out copies for everyone who would be affected. The USP's district office, Brenda as HOA president, and all 37 homes that received mail from that cluster box on Ocotillo Drive. The next morning, I hand-delivered my appeal to Brenda's house. She wasn't home, so I left it in her mailbox, which I noticed was a completely different style than what the HOA guidelines specified. Interesting. Then I went to the post office and handed my termination notice to the district manager, a tired-looking woman named Patricia who seemed completely unsurprised by the weird request. "HOA dispute?" she asked. "How'd you guess? It's always HOA disputes." "Let me make sure I understand. You're terminating the easement for the cluster box on Ocotillo Drive." "That's correct." She sighed and pulled up something on her computer. "That box serves 37 addresses. You understand we're going to have to install individual mailboxes for all those homes. That's going to take time and money." "I understand, but it's my property and I'm within my legal rights." "Oh, I'm not arguing with you. We're just the mail service. If you own the land and you're terminating the easement legally, we'll comply. It's just going to be a headache." She stamped my notice as received and made a copy for her files. 90 days from today. We'll send someone out to assess the situation and make plans for alternative delivery. I spent the rest of the day delivering notices to every house on Ocotillo Drive. Most people weren't home, so I left the notices in their regular mailboxes with a sticky note apologizing for the inconvenience and explaining that I was forced into this action by an unreasonable HOA fine. By that evening, my phone was ringing off the hook. The first call came from a guy named Steve who lived on Ocotillo. "Is this Derek York speaking?" "What the hell, man? You're taking away our mailbox." I explained the situation with Brenda and the fine. There was a long pause. Okay, yeah, Brenda's awful. She fined me twice last year for having the wrong kind of garden hose visible from the street. But couldn't you just repaint your mailbox? It's the principle. She's applying rules retroactively without proper procedure. If I give in on this, what's next? She already fines people for grass being a quarter-inch too tall. So we all suffer because you two are having a pissing contest. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I really am. But maybe if enough people are inconvenienced, the HOA board will realize Brenda's overreach is a problem. He hung up on me. The calls continued throughout the evening. Some people were angry, some were understanding, and a few were actually supportive. One woman, Jennifer, who lived 2 houses down from Brenda, said she'd been looking for a reason to challenge Brenda's authority for years. She's a tyrant, Jennifer said. Last month she told me my front door wreath was too festive after Christmas. It was January 3rd. I hope this finally wakes people up. At 9 that night, Brenda called. I almost didn't answer, but I was curious to hear her response. You cannot do this, she said without preamble. This is extortion. It's property rights. I'm terminating an easement I'm legally entitled to terminate. You're doing this to retaliate against a legitimate HOA fine. I'm doing this because I no longer wish to provide free land for community postal service. If my mailbox is such a problem, maybe everyone should deal with individual mailboxes. I will not be blackmailed into withdrawing your fine. I'm not asking you to withdraw anything. I'm simply exercising my property rights. The two things are completely unrelated. I could practically hear her teeth grinding through the phone. The board will fight this. The board should probably focus on following its own bylaws. Speaking of which, I've submitted a formal appeal of my fine. I expect a response within the 14 days specified in the HOA covenant. She hung up without another word. Over the next week, things escalated. I received a cease and desist letter from an attorney representing the HOA, claiming my termination of the easement was done in bad faith. Marcus responded with a letter of his own, pointing out that property rights don't require good faith justification, and that the HOA had no standing to challenge my decision. The Postal Service sent a surveyor to examine the cluster box location and start planning for individual mailbox installation. I saw him out there with his measuring equipment and took him a bottle of water. He was a friendly guy named Robert. This is going to be a mess, Robert said cheerfully. We'll have to install boxes for 37 houses. Some of them are going to need posts installed, permits filed. But hey, job security, right? I feel bad about the extra work. Don't. We deal with this stuff all the time. HOAs are the worst. I've got another neighborhood where the HOA won't let anyone have mailboxes attached to their houses because of the aesthetic, but they also won't provide land for a cluster box. Those people have to rent P.O. boxes. At least your neighborhood will end up with actual mail delivery. Meanwhile, Brenda was not taking this well. She started showing up at my house at random times, always with her phone out, recording me or my property, looking for new violations to cite. I made sure everything was absolutely perfect. My grass was exactly 3 inches. My trash cans were invisible from the street. My house numbers were perfectly centered. I even measured the angle of my garden hose. 2 weeks after I submitted the easement termination, the HOA called an emergency meeting. It was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, naturally. I took another personal day to attend. The meeting was held in the community center, a bland building near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived, the parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently, the mailbox situation had gotten people's attention in a way that normal HOA business never did. Inside, about 60 people were crammed into a room designed for 40. Brenda sat at a folding table at the front with two other board members, Gary, the treasurer, and Susan, the secretary. All three of them looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about my malicious termination of the easement. She had prepared a PowerPoint, complete with maps, photos of the cluster box, and a financial breakdown of what it would cost to install individual mailboxes. "Derek York is holding our neighborhood hostage," Brenda declared, "because he refuses to comply with reasonable community standards. His selfish actions will result in costs and inconvenience for 36 families, all because he doesn't want to repaint a mailbox." When she finished, she opened the floor for comments. I raised my hand immediately. "The chair recognizes Derek York," Brenda said with obvious distaste. I stood up. "I want to be clear about something. I never refused to repaint my mailbox. I refused to pay a fine for a violation that doesn't exist. My mailbox was installed in 2015 and was grandfathered under the old rules." Brenda claimed the grandfather clause was eliminated via email, but I've requested proof of the board vote that changed this rule, and I've received nothing. That's because no vote happened. Brenda unilaterally changed the rules, which violates our HOA bylaws. There was murmuring in the crowd. Brenda's face turned red. The board has discretion to update regulations as needed. Not according to Article 7, Section 3 of our bylaws, which requires a vote and 30 days' notice to homeowners. I'm happy to read the exact language if you'd like. Gary, the treasurer, leaned over and whispered something to Brenda. She looked like she wanted to argue, but Susan, the secretary, was already pulling up documents on her laptop. "I don't have any record of a vote on mailbox regulations," Susan said quietly. The murmuring got louder. Jennifer, the woman who'd been supportive on the phone, stood up. "I think we need to talk about Brenda's enforcement patterns in general. I've lived here for 8 years, and in the last 6 months, I've seen more fines issued than in the previous 7 years combined. This feels personal and targeted." Other people started chiming in with their own stories. The Johnsons talked about the trash can fine. The Morales family explained the grass measurement incident. Tom brought up his house number citation. It quickly became clear that Brenda had been on a violation spree, and people were fed up. Brenda tried to regain control of the meeting, but it had gotten away from her. Finally, Gary stood up and said, "I move that we withdraw Derek's mailbox fine and reinstate the grandfather clause for all pre-2019 mailboxes." "Second," said Susan immediately. "This is highly irregular," Brenda protested. "We can't just make decisions without proper process." The irony was lost on no one. Gary called for a vote. Every hand in the room went up except Brenda's. "Motion passes," Gary said. "Derek, your fine is withdrawn." "Will you reconsider the easement termination?" I had anticipated this. "I'll be happy to restore the easement on 3 conditions. First, all fines issued in the last 6 months need to be reviewed by the full board, not just Brenda, to ensure they were valid. Second, the HOA needs to send written notice to all homeowners about any rule changes, not just emails that may or may not be received. Third, board meetings need to be scheduled at times when working people can attend, like evenings or weekends." There was applause. Gary and Susan looked at each other, then nodded. "I think we can agree to those terms," Gary said. "Absolutely not," Brenda said. "I am the president of this board, and I won't be dictated to by someone who's trying to manipulate us." "Brenda," Susan said gently, "maybe it's time to consider whether you still want to be president. This has gotten really out of hand." "I am not resigning. I've dedicated 3 years to keeping this neighborhood in compliance with our standards." "You've dedicated 3 years to power tripping," someone called out from the back. The meeting devolved into chaos. People were standing, shouting, making accusations. Brenda was red-faced and shaking. Gary eventually adjourned the meeting without any formal resolution, saying the board would meet privately and send out communication to everyone within a week. I left feeling exhausted but vindicated. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA. The mailbox fine was officially withdrawn. A special election would be held in 30 days to potentially recall Brenda from her position as president. In the meantime, all enforcement actions were suspended pending a comprehensive review of HOA rules and procedures. But Brenda wasn't done. 2 weeks after the meeting, I got home from work to find my mailbox destroyed. Someone had taken a baseball bat or something similar to it, smashing it beyond repair. The post was bent, the box was dented and crushed, and my mail was scattered across my lawn. I called the police and filed a vandalism report. The officer who responded was sympathetic but not optimistic about finding the culprit. "Any cameras in the neighborhood?" he asked. "Not on my street." "Any idea who might have done this?" I told him about the HOA situation. He wrote everything down but didn't look surprised. "HOA disputes get nasty," he said. "I'd recommend getting a camera installed and document everything." I collected my mail and took photos of the destroyed mailbox. Then I called Tom, who had a security camera that faced the street. He pulled up his footage, and we saw exactly what I expected. At 2 in the morning, a figure in dark clothing and a baseball cap had walked up to my mailbox and systematically destroyed it with a metal pipe. The camera angle wasn't good enough to identify the person definitively, but the build and gait looked an awful lot like Brenda. I showed the footage to the police officer, who asked me to email it to him. He said he'd follow up. The next day, I went to Home Depot and bought the most compliant, regulation-perfect mailbox I could find. I installed it carefully, making sure every measurement matched the HOA guidelines exactly. I even bought midnight onyx paint and did 2 coats. While I was installing it, several neighbors came by to express their support and their disgust over the vandalism. The story had spread through the neighborhood quickly, and public opinion had turned decisively against Brenda. The special election happened on schedule. The HOA hired an outside company to manage it to ensure fairness. Brenda ran unopposed for her own recall, arguing that she had done nothing wrong and was being persecuted for enforcing community standards. She lost by a vote of 114-7. Gary was elected as the new president. One of his first acts was to establish an HOA enforcement committee with rotating membership to prevent any single person from wielding too much power. The mailbox grandfather clause was formally reinstated with proper notice and procedure. I thought that would be the end of it. 3 weeks after the election, I was served with a lawsuit. Brenda was suing me personally for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit claimed that my easement termination had been a malicious act designed to harm her reputation, and that my accusations about her violating HOA bylaws were false and damaging. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. I called Marcus immediately. "She's insane," Marcus said after I read him the complaint. "This lawsuit is frivolous. You exercised your legal property rights and you made truthful statements about HOA procedure. This won't go anywhere." So I just ignore it. "No, you definitely can't ignore it. I'll file a response." And honestly, you might want to consider a counterclaim for the mailbox vandalism. The police never charged her. Criminal charges and civil liability are different things. If you can show she probably did it, you can sue for damages and attorney fees. I thought about it. Part of me just wanted this whole thing to be over. But another part of me was tired of Brenda's bullying and wanted to make sure she couldn't do this to anyone else. "Let's do it," I said. Marcus filed a response to Brenda's lawsuit, along with a counterclaim for the mailbox vandalism, citing the security footage and Brenda's documented pattern of retaliation. We also filed a motion for sanctions, arguing that Brenda's lawsuit was frivolous and designed to harass me. The legal process moved slowly. Months passed. Discovery happened, which meant both sides had to turn over documents and answer questions. Brenda's attorney requested all my communications about the HOA, and I handed over everything, confident I had nothing to hide. During Brenda's deposition, which I attended, she was hostile and evasive. When asked about her whereabouts on the night of the mailbox vandalism, she claimed she was home alone and had no alibi. When asked about the email she claimed to have sent about the mailbox rule change, she couldn't produce it. When asked about the meeting minutes that should have documented the vote, she said they were in process and had never been finalized. Her attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable as the deposition went on. My deposition was straightforward. I explained the timeline, my reasoning, and my legal basis for everything I'd done. Brenda's attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, but I kept my answers calm and factual. After depositions, settlement discussions began. Marcus reported that Brenda's attorney was pushing her to drop the lawsuit, but she was refusing. She genuinely believed she'd been wronged and wanted her day in court. Fine by me. The case went to trial 8 months after it was filed. It was heard by Judge Raymond Cooper in Maricopa County Superior Court. The trial lasted 3 days. Brenda's attorney argued that I had acted out of spite and had used my property rights as a weapon to harm Brenda personally. He called several witnesses from Ocotillo Drive who testified about the inconvenience and stress of potentially losing their cluster mailbox. But on cross-examination, Marcus got each of them to admit that the situation had been resolved when I agreed to restore the easement, and that the real inconvenience had come from Brenda's excessive enforcement of petty violations. Marcus put on our case systematically. He called Susan, the former HOA secretary, who testified that there had never been a vote to change the mailbox rules. He called Gary, who explained how Brenda's enforcement had become increasingly aggressive and arbitrary. He showed the security footage of the mailbox vandalism and had an expert witness testify that the person in the video matched Brenda's height and build. Most devastatingly, he produced emails that Brenda had sent to other board members in the days after the emergency HOA meeting. In them, she explicitly talked about making Derek pay and showing him what happens when you cross me. When Brenda took the stand in her own defense, Marcus was relentless but professional. He walked her through every decision, every fine, every violation notice. He highlighted the inconsistencies and the lack of proper procedure. By the time he was done, Brenda was in tears on the stand, insisting she had only been trying to maintain community standards. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found in my favor on all counts, dismissing Brenda's claims entirely. They also found for me on the counterclaim, determining that Brenda had more likely than not vandalized my mailbox. They awarded me $3,000 for the mailbox damage and property violation, plus attorney fees. More importantly, the verdict was public record, which meant Brenda's behavior was now documented in a legal decision. I thought it was finally over. It wasn't. 2 weeks after the trial, the police called me. The officer who had taken my original vandalism report wanted to talk. I met him at a coffee shop in Temp. "We've been investigating something," Officer Martinez said, "and your case came up. Are you aware that there have been 7 other vandalism incidents in your neighborhood over the last year?" I knew about a couple. "Slashed tires, broken windows, that kind of thing." "Exactly. We started looking into patterns, and they all have something in common. Every victim had received an HOA violation notice from Brenda Carlson within 2 weeks of the vandalism." I felt a chill. "You think Brenda was vandalizing people's property?" "We're building a case. The civil trial helped because it gave us the security footage and established a pattern of behavior. We've been interviewing other victims and checking for more camera footage. I can't share details of an ongoing investigation, but I wanted you to know we're taking this seriously." 3 months later, Brenda was arrested and charged with 7 counts of criminal mischief and vandalism. The evidence was substantial. Security footage from multiple incidents, testimony from victims about the timing relative to HOA violations, and forensic evidence linking tools found in Brenda's garage to damage patterns. The story made the local news. "Former HOA president arrested for vandalism spree" was the headline in the Arizona Republic. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone in Saguaro Heights knew the whole story. Brenda's trial took place a year after my civil case. I was called as a witness and testified about the mailbox incident and the HOA dispute. The prosecution built a compelling case that Brenda had systematically targeted homeowners who challenged her authority or violated HOA rules in her view. She was convicted on 6 of 7 counts. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in county jail, with credit for time served, plus restitution to all victims and 3 years of probation. In his sentencing statement, Judge Martinez said, "This case represents a troubling abuse of a position of trust in a community. HOA leadership is meant to serve homeowners, not to terrorize them." Life in Saguaro Heights slowly returned to normal after that. Gary proved to be a reasonable and fair HOA president. The enforcement committee he'd established worked well, reviewing all violation notices before they were issued and ensuring they were legitimate and proportional. The mailbox rules were revised to be more sensible. As long as your mailbox was functional, weatherproof, and not offensive, it was acceptable. The 6-page specification document was reduced to a single paragraph. I kept my perfectly compliant Midnight Onyx mailbox, though. After everything it had been through, it felt like a monument to standing up for what was right. Tom and I became good friends through the whole ordeal. We'd barbecue on weekends and laugh about the absurdity of the mailbox wars. Jennifer organized a neighborhood watch program that was actually about community building rather than enforcement, and participation was strong. As for the cluster mailbox on Ocotillo Drive, it's still there. I never did terminate that easement after reaching the agreement with the board. The 90-day notice period expired while we were still working through the legal issues, but I simply filed a new easement agreement, this time with clear terms about maintenance responsibilities and the rights of affected homeowners. One evening, about 2 years after the whole thing started, I was checking my mail when a young couple pulled up in a moving truck. They were looking at the house 3 doors down, which had just gone on the market. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "Do you live in this neighborhood?" "I do," I said. "How's the HOA? We've heard horror stories about some neighborhoods." I smiled. "It's actually pretty good now. We had some issues a while back, but they got resolved. The current board is reasonable and focused on actual community needs rather than nitpicking. I'd say it's one of the better HOAs in the Phoenix area." "That's great to hear. We were worried." "Just one piece of advice," I said. If you do move in, read your property documents carefully. You might be surprised what rights you have. They thanked me and drove off to look at the house. I walked back to my own house, past my perfectly regulation mailbox, and thought about how a single ridiculous fine had led to civil lawsuits, criminal charges, and a complete restructuring of neighborhood governance. Sometimes standing up to bullies is exhausting and complicated. Sometimes it requires legal battles and public confrontation. But it's worth it, not just for yourself, but for everyone else who comes after you. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hey, saw Brenda got released on probation last week. Thought you should know." "Don't think she'll be bothering anyone anymore, though," I texted back. "Thanks for the heads up, and thanks for everything." "Anytime. Though maybe pick easier battles next time, something less dramatic than removing 37 mailboxes. No promises," I wrote back. I settled onto my couch and turned on the evening news. The anchor was doing a story about an HOA in Scottsdale that had banned all outdoor plants except for one specific variety of cactus. Homeowners were in revolt. I shook my head. Some people never learn. But at least in Saguaro Heights, we'd learned our lesson. Power without accountability leads to abuse. Community standards are important, but so is common sense and basic human decency. And most importantly, sometimes the most effective way to fight unreasonable rules is to exercise your legal rights in ways that make everyone reconsider the whole system. My doorbell rang. It was Tom, holding a six-pack of beer. "Saw you talking to those potential new neighbors," he said. "Figured we should celebrate the possibility of reasonable people moving in." We sat on my back patio, watching the sunset over the desert, and talked about everything except HOAs and mailboxes. It was peaceful. It was normal. It was exactly what community living should be. The next morning, I drove past Brenda's old house on my way to work. New owners had moved in months ago, and they'd already made changes. The excessive flower arrangements were gone, replaced by simple, elegant desert landscaping. The live, laugh, love sign had been removed. The garden gnomes had disappeared. It was just a house now, not a fortress of suburban enforcement. At a stoplight, I checked my mail app on my phone. There was a message from Gary, the HOA president, with the subject line "Quarterly Newsletter." I opened it. The newsletter was 2 pages long, written in plain English and focused on genuinely useful information. Upcoming street maintenance, a community barbecue, and a reminder about water conservation during the summer months. At the bottom was a note. "Remember, we're all neighbors first. Let's treat each other with kindness and common sense." Simple. Reasonable. Exactly what an HOA should be. I made it to work and settled into my day of coding and meetings. Around lunch, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Is this Derek York?" a woman's voice asked, speaking. "My name is Andrea Chen. I'm a reporter with HOA Watchdog, a consumer advocacy publication. I'm doing a story about HOA reform in Arizona, and your case with Brenda Carlson came up in my research. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave the whole thing in the past, but I thought about other people dealing with unreasonable HOAs, feeling powerless and alone. "Sure," I said. "I can talk." The interview lasted an hour. Andrea was thorough and thoughtful, asking not just about what happened, but about the broader implications for HOA governance and homeowner rights. She was particularly interested in the property easement angle and how it had given me leverage. "A lot of people don't realize what rights they have," Andrea said. "They assume the HOA has absolute power, but that's not true. Property law still applies. Contracts still have to be followed. There are checks and balances if people know where to look." That's exactly right, I said. I almost just paid the fine because I didn't think I could fight it. But once I actually read the documents and understood my rights, everything changed. The article came out 2 weeks later. It was titled, "How One Homeowner's Mailbox Battle Reformed an Entire HOA," and included interviews with multiple Saguaro Heights residents, legal experts, and HOA management professionals. It presented my case as an example of effective advocacy and emphasized the importance of homeowners educating themselves about their rights. The article got picked up by several other outlets, and suddenly, I was getting calls from people around Arizona and even other states asking for advice about their own HOA disputes. I wasn't a lawyer and couldn't give legal advice, but I could share my experience and encourage people to read their documents and consult with attorneys. One call stood out. It was from a man named Richard in Tucson, who was facing a similar situation with a HOA president who was issuing fines for increasingly absurd violations. "They fined me for having a basketball hoop in my driveway," Richard said. "My kids are 9 and 11. What are they supposed to do? Never play outside? What do your HOA bylaws say about basketball hoops?" I asked. "I don't know. I've never actually read them." "Start there. Read every page. Look for inconsistencies, procedural requirements, anything that gives you leverage. And document everything. Every fine, every interaction, every email. You might need it later." "Did you ever think all this would happen when Brenda gave you that first fine?" I laughed. "Not even remotely. I thought I'd just pay it and move on." But sometimes standing up for yourself leads to bigger things. After I hung up, I thought about that question. The whole saga had started with such a small thing, a mailbox that was supposedly the wrong shade of black. But that small thing had revealed bigger problems. Abuse of power, lack of accountability, and a community that had been too passive in the face of unreasonable enforcement. By refusing to accept an unjust fine, I'd accidentally triggered a chain of events that reformed the HOA, removed a tyrant from power, and resulted in criminal prosecution for a pattern of vandalism and intimidation. It was more than I'd ever intended, but it was also necessary. 6 months after the article came out, I received an invitation to speak at a homeowner advocacy conference in Phoenix. The organizers wanted me to share my story and talk about strategies for dealing with difficult HOAs. I'd never done public speaking before, and the idea terrified me. But I accepted. The conference was held at a hotel near Sky Harbor Airport. About 200 people attended, ranging from frustrated homeowners to lawyers specializing in HOA law to state legislators considering HOA reform bills. My session was titled "Understanding Your Rights: Property Law vs. HOA Covenants." I spoke for 30 minutes, walking through my experience and emphasizing the key lessons. Read your documents, understand your property rights, follow proper procedures, and document everything. During the Q&A session, a woman in her 60s raised her hand. "I've been fighting my HOA for 3 years," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "They've fined me over $8,000 for violations I don't believe are valid. I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford an attorney. What am I supposed to do?" The room went silent. I could see the desperation in her face, and I recognized it because I'd felt it too when Brenda first started targeting me. "First," I said, "there are legal aid organizations that help with HOA disputes. The Arizona Department of Real Estate also has resources. Second, check if your HOA's fines comply with state law. Arizona limits how much HOAs can fine for violations. Third, request an internal hearing to dispute the fines. Your bylaws probably require the HOA to give you that opportunity. And fourth, don't give up. These fights are exhausting, but you have rights, and there are people who will help you enforce them. After the session, several people came up to thank me and share their own stories. The woman who'd asked the question gave me a hug and said I'd given her hope. Driving home that evening, I felt a strange sense of completion. What had started as a personal grievance had become something larger, a small part of a movement pushing back against HOA overreach and advocating for homeowner rights. Life continued to move forward. I got a promotion at work. Tom and I started a weekly poker game with some neighbors. Jennifer's community-building efforts resulted in a neighborhood directory and regular social events. Saguaro Heights felt like an actual community rather than just a collection of houses subject to arbitrary enforcement. I even started dating someone, a woman named Melissa I met at a friend's barbecue. On our third date, she asked about the trial that had been in the news. "That was you," she said. "The mailbox guy, guilty as charged. That's actually kind of amazing. You stood up to a bully and won." I got lucky. I had resources and support. A lot of people in similar situations don't. Still, it takes courage to fight back, especially when it would have been easier to just comply. That word, courage, stuck with me. I'd never thought of myself as particularly courageous. I'd just been stubborn and annoyed and unwilling to accept something I knew was wrong. But maybe that's what courage is sometimes. Just refusing to accept injustice, even when it's easier to go along. A year after the trial, I ran into Brenda at a grocery store. I was picking up steaks for a barbecue when I saw her in the produce section, examining tomatoes. She looked older, tired. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something unexpected. Shame. She quickly looked away and moved to a different part of the store. I thought about approaching her, saying something, but what would I say? I'd already won every battle. There was nothing left to fight about. Tom, who was with me, had seen the encounter. "That was weird," he said. "Yeah. You okay?" "I'm fine." It's just strange seeing her as a regular person instead of this force of nature. She was never a force of nature. She was just a petty tyrant with too much time on her hands. You showed everyone that. We paid for our groceries and left. I didn't see Brenda again after that. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Gary's leadership. When his term ended, a woman named Patricia took over as president. She was a retired teacher with a calm demeanor and a focus on practical problem solving. The neighborhood thrived. My mailbox remained standing, regulation compliant, a quiet monument to the power of property rights and the importance of reading the fine print. 3 years after everything started, I sold my house. I'd gotten a job offer in Seattle that was too good to pass up, and Melissa and I had decided to move together and start a new chapter. The couple who bought my house was young, expecting their first child. During the walkthrough, the husband asked about the HOA. "It's good," I said. "Really?" "They're reasonable, focused on actual community issues, and they follow proper procedures." "We heard there was some drama a few years back," I smiled. "There was, but it got resolved. The neighborhood learned some important lessons about governance and accountability. You'll be fine." As I handed over the keys and signed the final documents, I felt a pang of nostalgia. This house, this mailbox, this whole experience had been such a significant part of my life. But it was time to move on. Seattle was rainy and green and completely different from Phoenix. Melissa and I bought a condo in Capitol Hill with no HOA at all, just a condo association that handled building maintenance and nothing else. It was blissfully free of regulations about mailbox colors and grass height. Still, I kept in touch with Tom and some other Saguaro Heights friends. They sent me updates about the neighborhood. New families moving in, community events, the occasional minor drama that got resolved quickly and reasonably. One message from Tom made me particularly happy. New guy on my street got a violation notice for a dead tree. He appealed. Board agreed the tree died from disease, not neglect. They waived the fine and helped him get it removed safely. This is what HOAs should be. That was the real victory, I realized. Not beating Brenda in court, not getting her arrested, not even reforming the HOA procedures. The real victory was creating a system where conflicts got resolved fairly, and people treated each other with basic decency. Years passed. I heard through the grapevine that Brenda had moved out of state after her probation ended, starting fresh somewhere where nobody knew her story. I hoped she'd learned from the experience, but I also knew that some people never change. I'd changed, though. The whole experience had taught me that systems only work when people participate in them and hold leaders accountable. It had taught me that property rights matter and knowledge is power. Most importantly, it had taught me that standing up for what's right, even in small things, can have ripple effects you never expect. Melissa and I got married in a small ceremony on the Seattle waterfront. Tom flew up for it, as did several other friends from Sagaro Heights. At the reception, Tom gave a toast. "To Derek," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all that sometimes the best way to deal with an unreasonable fine is to remove 37 mailboxes." Everyone laughed, including me. "But seriously," Tom continued, "you showed us what it means to stand up for yourself and your community. Sagaro Heights is better because you refuse to accept injustice. Here's to fighting the good fight, even when it's over something as stupid as a mailbox." We clinked glasses and drank, and I felt genuinely grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts, because in the end, it wasn't really about a mailbox at all. It was about dignity, fairness, and the right to live in your own home without fear of arbitrary punishment from petty tyrants. And those things are always worth fighting for.